I'm still continuing to find that like I don't have all the right answers.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us individually ever will, but I know that collectively we can find the right answers for like our groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like remembering to raise those questions.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carla Duke, and today I'm joined by Javiera Cordero. Javiera is a producer and customer success lead at Beamable, a tool enabling Unity developers to easily add features to their games. But the real reason I reached out to her was because of her stance on the Activision Blizzard lawsuit that swept through social media last month. As someone who wants to help make the industry a better place and strives for better workplace culture and inclusion, I felt this conversation would be really impactful for the Zero to Play community to hear. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 10 of season 3 of the Zero to Play podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Why don't you introduce yourself to the podcast and explain a bit about why you're here today?
Yeah. So hi, my name is Javiera Cordero. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a trans Puerto Rican woman from Brooklyn, New York City, and I work as a producer in the game industry. My current title is Customer Success Lead at this company called Beamable. We are a tools developer that makes a sort of a comprehensive toolkit backend for Unity game developers to essentially gain access in a low-code way to multiplayer features, matchmaking features, essentially like features that can help position a game to be a live service and thereby just position the studio to be more sustainable by creating a relationship with the player where it's not just player plays the game, player's done with the game, player goes off, plays another game, but rather like a game that is like a hobby or something that is sort of a little bit more culturally profound. And so like, I feel really fortunate in that like my work at Beamable, like Beamable's goals in terms of wanting to help game makers succeed are my own goals of wanting to help the lives of people who make games and so I get to sort of have a direct hand in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you must work with so many different teams, different studios. What has been one thing about like working with different teams that you find is a common thread that you think could be improved, or like, well, we don't have to go right there right now, but just like what's it been like working with so many different studios? Because that's what I think is really cool about Beamable is you touch so many different projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I will just say that like in a given week, I speak to like the tech leads and the producers from studios in India, Pakistan, Ireland, Australia, Brazil, Vancouver, Canada, and I believe they're in, I forget the name of their exact city, but they're in Italy. But we speak with all of these international dev teams, and so like it's really beautiful to sort of see the cultural differences in like what types of communication are more impactful than others. And some developers might sort of favor a more direct style than others to help speed along the communication pipeline. It's helpful to like really spend the time to establish a relationship with them. But I think the key through line is just sort of patience and compassion for how complex making games can be and how all of these moving timetables and multiple pressure points from various departments in a given company and publishing, and how that can sort of really put a lot of strain on a person. And so I think that just working with so many international teams on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis has just made me a more patient person.
Totally.
Patient in the sense of talking more clearly, talking a little bit more slow, or being more mindful about the words that I'm using, and being more organized. Because, like, for example, this developer in Pakistan that we're working with, their 9 to 5 closes like an hour before like our like Boston-based company's 9 to 5 begins.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kind of attention that their studio requires for any bug fixes or feature requests that we're working on for them, it requires a little bit more attention, because if I miss or if I don't respond to a message of theirs and it's like 3 o'clock our time, what that means is it essentially costs them an entire day, where like, because they'll get to it, but then we won't get to it the next day. And so I think the more diverse teams that you work with, the better it grows your creative muscle of like problem solving and of sort of getting around these time constraints of like having a developer be on the exact other side of the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. You mentioned communication, and even within like a studio, I have the luxury of being in an in-person studio at the moment in New Zealand, and communication is one of the biggest things. And it's hard enough when you have everyone around you, to figure out how to best communicate. And it sounds like, you're having to deal with the challenge of communicating with people that English isn't their first language. It's completely different cultures that you're dealing with. I have so much respect for people that are able to function in that kind of environment, especially in the last year. Just most people being remote. Do you have any? I mean, you mentioned patience and being mindful. That's all great advice. Do you have any other kind of actionable advice for people working remote in order to better communicate with their employer or their studio or their colleagues? Any advice
Yeah.
there?
I would say like the most significant one is be very mindful and conscious of the assumptions that you are making about the work conditions, or even about like the way that someone else might be using a given piece of software or program. Just like a hard example would be like if I, as a producer, am sort of like asking an engineer to do a thing, they might have their screen configured in a way that I just can't see. And like they may not be able to see the information that I'd be pointing at. So I think keeping that in mind whenever you're having conversations, and just being extra aware for whenever there's friction in conversation, in that there might be something like you're both like having the assumption that you're experiencing the same reality, but when in actuality, like you're both interfacing with it a different way. And so it like keeping in mind that like you are at all times a translator, and that you are never having a one-to-one conversation, and sort of going at it with an open mind of like what is it like to be in this person's shoes, and what is their experience and comfort level, and then also on an interpersonal level, like what is their experience, like what has their past experience been working with our company or working with our product, because they may be junior, they may be mid-tier or senior. And so I think maintaining a real holistic awareness of where someone is at when you are working with them goes such a long way to actually having an effective working relationship. Like if we're working together and I don't know that maybe your wife or partner is pregnant or sick, or maybe like that's coming up in a few months, like that's all sort of critical information that it doesn't often come up naturally in the course of a working conversation. But the better that I'm able to acknowledge and take that into account in the way that we work together, it empowers you to feel comfortable and you to have a very strong degree of a subconscious sense of safety. And then you can just be more focused and be more present at your work. And then it makes you feel respected. And then, and that's going to make me feel also like I'm doing a good job in working with you. And so I think like to circle it back, like checking in on a frequent week-to-week basis
Mm.
of if you are aware of all of the conditions of what your coworkers are going through.
Yeah, and especially in a remote environment, where you can't have those kind of water cooler conversations as easily. As a producer, do you have those kind of processes in place to get to know those emotional things that are going on in people's lives? Like, do you do like a regular weekly stand up or retro type thing to kind of ask those questions, or do you just let it happen organically?
Um, well, I can definitely say like as far as like organically, like if you're trying to grow rice and you just sprinkle some rice into a field, some might grow. But if you like really like do the work to research of what it takes to like cultivate a proper rice paddy, and you put in all you raise the conditions for that rice to really grow and flourish, you're going to get so much more results.
Hmm.
So that being said, to answer that question about like just about spending time to really like check in about what are someone's conditions, it's sort of a mixture. And like where I would say like we're still always learning as a company of how to do that better, but our manner, like our leadership has touch like one-on-one touch bases with every single person in the company once a week.
Hmm.
And so that gives the leadership team a strong sense to do that. And then I in turn have my own sort of one-to-ones with the individuals that I interface with on like a week-to-week basis.
Hmm.
um, and it might be initially challenging for a company that isn't taking that time to budget the time to have those conversations. But what I can say is that the effect on performance when people are allowed to sort of voice what they're going through is significant,
Mm.
because the things in their life, like everything is interconnected. And so if like in this hypothetical situation where like you have a partner who's like gonna like be due for their pregnancy in like a month, right? Like that's going to affect you no matter what. And so me knowing that in advance, like if I were to just like give your schedule some slack, or even just give you extra grace
Hmm.
for that lead up period, or even just be like, okay, well, I know that this person's life is about to completely change. Why don't we just budget in an extra week where they can just focus on that?
Mm.
Like when you express care to people who work with you, um, the like the loyalty shows through.
Hmm.
That's what builds trust. So I
Yeah.
think just coming back to trust building
Yeah, no, that's
is like
that's a great mindset to have. It's a great, I think, if you meet a producer or you work with a producer that cares about your feelings and acts in a way that you can feel like they genuinely care. I feel like that creates a completely different environment in your workplace. Just quickly, as some people listening may have noticed, there's some Discord notifications happening in the background, and I just want to I think it might be coming from your side. If we could shut that off just in case
oh, sorry.
it happens. If no, it's fine. I thought it was on my side, but uh,
Should be clear now. I closed it.
awesome. Yeah, sweet. Cool. So one question I want to ask, and it's hard because being remote and being in person, I feel like that they're two completely different conversations. But if you could speak on both, I think that could be helpful. But just in your scenario and from your experience, when you're onboarding, whether it's you're hiring someone or if you're looking for a job, I'd say let's go from the perspective of if you're going for an interview for a new job. What kind of experience do you think is, speaking from someone that wants to create an environment where they feel cared for and like heard?
Mhm.
What kind of experience would you expect during an interview from the employer? Is there anything like that you can talk about that experience and how you think it would best take
Yeah.
place?
I think the first thing that I would want to comment on would be just that as a person that is interviewing someone else, you are like asking someone to talk to like tell a story of why they're relevant to this role, right? And there are so many ways to do that that can come across as sort of like challenging or aggressive. And there's this like older, more like masculine way of going about that interview is going along with the theory that if you apply pressure to someone and you get them to crack, then you can get them to show them who they really are. And, it's that can only lead to a toxic work environment where you will have people who don't respond well to that kind of behavior. And it's just, it feels like the least effective way to go about it for me, because I think for me, if I'm walking into an interview, what I would love to know ahead of time are the specific goals of that interview. Who is going to be in the interview ahead of time. I would love for there to be introductions in the beginning, along with pronouns, so that people can just refer to each other as they ought to. And then I would like to leave that interview having a very clear timeline of next steps, so that I can, as a person who is looking for work, best structure my time. And I think like a lot of game studios are so pressed for time and they don't have dedicated resources, or they might be relying on an external recruiter. But so much of the lag time in interviews, where like you might interview a position and then you might hear back from it a month later, or 2 weeks later, or like 5 weeks later, all of that essentially is just on the disorganization of the studio. And surely like there are like internal things that might be going on, like maybe someone who's critical for that interview pipeline could be going on vacation, or someone might get sick, or there's a lot of reasons for why. But I think being proactive about all of those moving parts and being like, okay, cool. So like, first off, like, thank you so much, like expressing gratitude of just being like, hey, like, thank you for applying. Like we the employer are the ones in need. It is not like I think that's where the mistake between people who look for work, that they don't realize that they have much more power than they do. And they may have their like actual personal financial needs to meet. And I was in that situation up until April of this year, where I had been out of work for 8 months. And like, I felt like, oh my God, like I'm going to be nervous in an interview because like I need it more than but it's really not the case. By the time a game studio has actually put up a job posting, they like months have gone by that they would have actually benefited from having that role already filled.
Yeah.
So I think, I think like for what I would love to see more game studios do when they set up interviews is to like be more consistent about acknowledging that power dynamic and acknowledging that like the studio is really interested in that person, and that person was selected out of many others because of X, Y, and Z, and even just letting that person know, so that that person might have the interviewee might have a foothold or something to latch onto, so they can go, oh, cool, like that's why I was noticed. That's why I'm special to them. And then they can start that as their storytelling point for what they're good at, because that is so much more relevant than just regurgitating what's on their resume, or sort of like answering like pop quiz style questions. But like, I think that putting the emphasis more on what is it going to actually be like to work with you, that is often not as much the focus of interview questions as I feel like it should be, because one bad hire can bring down an entire company. And so
totally, that's really great advice, and it echoes the same mindset of caring for the person itself. That power dynamic of I am better than you, kind of looking down on the other person. Like it's exactly the same energy that a bad producer would kind of have on their team. So it's awesome that you're echoing that same mindset throughout all these different areas of game development and just workplaces in general. So obviously one thing I want to talk about is the Activision Blizzard lawsuit, because that's how I was made aware of you and your work. And you have an amazing thread on your Twitter with some incredible action items for ways that people can create better workplace environments and things like that. I'm sure you've gone really deep into that area, and you keep updating the thread with great resources and things like that that I would highly recommend other people to go to and visit. But is there any kind of lasting point from that whole scenario that you kind of keep coming back to, or that you keep telling others when it comes up in conversation?
I think the lasting point is that like we each individually have so much more influence than we give ourselves credit for, and it is that I would want people to focus on. It's not the blame or the or the like focusing on the fact that someone has XYZ privilege. Like that is a lot less interesting than actual action of like no matter where someone might be in their relationship to the privilege that they are actively benefiting from in being white, or in being male, or in being heterosexual, or even all three of those. That is not the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation is, with all of the tools and connections and knowledge at your fingertips, with you, Carl, as an individual, or you, the listener, like where in your life can you share your talents, and where in your life can you share your resources or your knowledge? Because I actively right now, I have around 7 individuals who are looking for full-time roles in the game industry. And so many of my conversations are often just emotional support of hearing their ideas and giving them feedback on it. Or I might hear them say something and it might spark a person who I know that also has a similar thing. Or in the context of this incredible one who I spoke to just yesterday, Kira, this narrative writer in Germany, she was, talking about how like she had like a couple years experience, and then somewhere down the conversation, she mentioned that she had 6 years of live transcription experience. So 6 years of developing all these strategies and techniques to like really thoroughly hear something and make sure that gets adequately reflected on paper. That is such a crucial ability. And I think if she were applying for any production job, like that would be like an instant sell point. But it was something to where when I heard it, it blew my mind. So I think just to circle back to the original conversation, is that like individually, we each have all of these talents, and it's important to realize where we can do better, because it's not enough for people to have siloed private conversations about all of these things that are the root issues of this Activision Blizzard lawsuit. Like ultimately, this is about like an abuse of power, and that power like happened to be like the most powerful in that organization. And there are so many supporting systems that kept those people that were causing the harm safe, or like so many systems that were complicit in their silence, or complicit in not in other ways. So like, for example, like if there is a woman in your organization who has worked at the same role for more than 3 years, like maybe take it upon yourself to ask them like are you looking for other, are you trying to advance? Do you feel like you know what you need, you know what to do to advance? And I think that that's a conversation that anyone at any organization, no matter their background, can have with their organization. And and they can have that in a way that it isn't focusing on any kind of like blame or sort of who to crucify, but rather like identifying what is the least process, most impact way to affect that. And so like when I think of like promotions or people, women or queer, trans people of color being in like a junior position for a long time, like the first thing I think of is that like that is a failure of leadership to provide an actual roadmap into like if you want to develop as a lighting artist or as a level designer or as a producer or as any role, like those people should feel like they know what to do to get there. And so I don't know. I don't. At the risk of rambling on, I'll close myself
No,
there.
that was a great just summation of, I don't know, just some really great points. One of the takeaways that I wrote down from your thread was showing a clear path to promotion, which is what you just mentioned, and some other action points that I took away that I thought were really valuable that someone like me on a daily basis can put into action. I really liked what you said about just going and just being observant of the workplace and the kind of things that are happening, and take it upon yourself to take action and start a conversation. It doesn't have to be a big drama filled thing. It could just be having a conversation so that that person knows that they're heard. That could be all that they need to get those gears moving, to make change happen. A few other things that I wrote were declining panels with 3+ men. I think that that's really powerful and important. Asking for ideas from diverse groups. I think that that's being proven as being beneficial from the company as a whole. Not only is that more fair, but I think from a financial perspective as well, it's proven to be a better thing to have a more diverse team and get ideas from different angles, from different cultures. That's proven to create a better product at the end. And the other one is including pronouns wherever you can. That's something that I'm learning to do. I'm a cisgender white male. I think I fall perfectly in this category of people that do act complicit, and that's what I'm actively trying to learn and become more aware of, and helpful for people like yourself that will that need that support from the general population, to just feel included, and to just feel like you're being a part of the conversation. Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into this, and that's why I appreciate this conversation as well, because it helps me go deeper into that area that isn't comfortable for me, and but speaking with you, I'm inspired by your skills, the kind of soft skills that you've proven about communication, being patient, how you're able to talk about serious topics in very condensed and easy ways. I feel like that's so valuable, and it proves that you are an incredible producer, and that's what I love to hear, and that inspires me, because those are the kind of people and relationships that I want to be around, so that I can merge with with your skills, and kind of transfer that between us. Yeah. Do you have anything to add onto that?
Well, so I was thinking about this including pronouns wherever you can bit, and it's still not something that like I even have all the right answers to. Like even as a like queer trans woman of color that feels very firmly rooted in she her, I like making it mandatory for people to put pronouns and things. Like it has been like I have seen it come up in other queer communities where like that also may not be a good solution either in terms of like forcing it. So I think ultimately basing systems around consent and like understanding that like whoever you're working with or everyone in your internal organization, that like they should all consent to these things, that is maybe like the cleanest, most efficient path to find out what the proper solutions are, because there may be indie game communities or companies where like it's a no-brainer for them, and they go through the effort and they put pronouns everywhere. And then there may also be organizations where they are like predominantly cisgender, and there might be a person who might be in the closet about being trans, and having to put pronouns that that don't betray their safety of being in the closet, it can also be harmful. So I think like even when I wrote that tweet and then like, coming back to it months later, I'm still continuing to find that like, I don't have all the right answers.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us individually ever will, but I know that collectively we can find the right answers for like our groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like remembering to raise those questions of like, I'm thinking of even in this like declining panels with 3 men bit, is that like, if there's an organization that has a panel and they ask you and they show you, and like, there's like 4 men already on there, like not just declining it, but also like challenging them and asking like, hey, so I see that you have all this men and I am invested in diversity. I think you should too, because you'll get better ideas from people with different backgrounds. That's just how diversity works.
Yeah.
And so like, like asking yourself, do you like, if like that's a panel on producers, like ask yourself, do you have 10 producers who are women that you can recommend to them? And sort of being proactive about that level of equity building, where it's not just like the decline, but it's the active participation of raising everyone else up together.
In today's supporter segment, I'd like to bring to your attention the Game Dev Global Summit 2021. It is a fully virtual conference hosted by Geekle, taking place on August 31st to September 2nd this year. There's 2 available tracks, a free junior track or a paid senior track, where there'll be 30 plus hours of content from 40 plus speakers with an expected 10,000 registered users. For more info on all the events taking place, you can visit their site geekle.us/gamedev. And if you use the promo code ZTP25, you can get 25% off the full admission price. Side note, I'll also be giving a talk in the free junior track titled Production Advice for When You Have No Producer, so feel free to stop by and listen to that if you're interested. Back to the show.
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of taking action rather than reacting and just kind of shunning away. It's taking an active role of helping the situation, helping educate, helping teach. Because I'm sure most people that I have spoken about these kind of conversations to, they're all very willing to make it better and wanting to make it more diverse and fair and inclusive, and all it takes is a conversation. Sometimes things happen without people even being aware, and it's just a conversation that needs to happen, and it can be a very quick and easy fix. But you're right, like having a list of female producers or people of color that you really admire in the industry that you can propose in situations like that, I think is helpful and definitely something that I want to do more of.
Yeah, and I will say, like, it's super hard, and I think that like throughout the like active investigation of how to sort of do our own individual parts in this culture shift, it's so important to have like compassion and respect and just patience for like how difficult and challenging it is, because like there are I'm looking at companies like Bungie, where they have been putting out job posting at their job posting because they're doing all this expanding, and I see a lot of like cis white men accepting those positions. And so like the thing that I would ask people in those hiring panels is like, are they asking the questions of like, why are our finalists for this role, like, are our finalists for this role all cis white? Or like, if they, I'm thinking about this also just from a personal standpoint, in that like Beamable, we have doubled our engineering team. Our engineering team went from 5 to I think we're at 13 now. And our engineering team is all men. And so like, like we're not doing it perfectly either. Like, so I think trying to identify like why that is, and trying to partner with organizations that do work with marginalized developers, and maybe approaching them first in the spirit of equity, approaching those organizations and being like, hey, we have a job posting, and in the spirit of equity, like for a staggered release, like maybe the first month that job posting is out, it goes out just to like people from marginalized backgrounds, and it gives them time to apply, so that like your team can evaluate those applications first. And like there's a lot of systems to sort of approach equity from that standpoint, but it's challenging. And that my like all of my personal free time is sort of spent working on this project that will come to light maybe in a few months, that is around equity and hiring. And I think a lot of it is simply just education, that a lot of these studios don't know how impactful it can be to word a job description a certain way, or to like let people work remote. So yeah, I can say from my experience, if the job posting that I applied for at the job that I have now, if they had asked for like game production experience, I would probably have felt intimidated and not have applied. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think remembering that there are other people having these conversations, and tapping into those organizations like Pixels, like Code Coven, like Limit Break, to do learning around that. And it's hard, but as a producer, put it on a calendar, like make time for it, and that's how it'll get done.
Totally. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about your resource or your project that you're working on that will help with this. Definitely interested to see more about that, and I think a lot of people in the industry will be would love to see that too. So one thing I do want to ask you about is I think you've touched on kind of workplace culture and kind of advice for people in leadership positions and things like that enough, and I want to spend some time just hearing a bit more about yourself and your journey into games. And one question that I love asking guests is why do you love games as a medium? Like, why did you choose this medium to explore? Like, what does games mean to you?
Yeah, games to me mean the most empowered medium of storytelling that humankind's ever created to affect change. It's the most powerful medium because it demands the active participation on the person, like, and interacting with it. That is spectacular. Someone can read a play, or like they can read a book and they might have opinions about it, but when you play a game, you are culpable for what happens. And so I think that there are so many incredible, powerful stories that can be told through that. But like games have always been my like personal saving grace. Like my mom had me at 17. We grew up in like project housing, Section 8 housing in Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens, and we were constantly displaced. But we didn't have any sort of stable home. We didn't have any sort of family. Like her family, like my extended family, they were physically and sexually abusive, and we were immediately cut off from that sense of community. But games provided a consistent place to sort of experience art that is visual, that is sound, that is interactive, that's design based. And it like gave me a sense of autonomy and control. And so games will always be super sacred for me. Games are really important to me. And then I guess like, which of the other questions should I?
So that was, yeah, that I mean, you I think answered that really beautifully. Were there any games in particular that you remember from your childhood that that you remember kind of escaping to, that you think are worth mentioning?
Yeah, I would say like the most impactful one for me was Final Fantasy VI. Like my first game was Combat on the Atari 2600, so that's like one of my first memories is like holding that controller. But like like played everything from like Duck Hunt to like Super Mario to Super Mario RPG. When will they do a remake? I don't know. But with Final Fantasy VI, what was so special about it was that like I learned to read through that game. Like I in my childhood, I always suffered from like reading, and schools tried to hold me back, and my mom pulled me out of school and homeschooled me for a few months. And in those few months, I also played Final Fantasy VI, and I learned to read, and it made me realize that like my capacity for reading and my love of like rich vocabulary that can express like nuanced ideas, it gave me so much power. And then there was just like the incredible music from Nobuo Uematsu of just walking through the open world and hearing these character arias like play through, and then like the incredible art by Yoshitaka Amano of just, it was one of the first games that had concept art sort of, Final Fantasy, the franchise, as like one of the first games that really had concept art baked into the pixel art of it. And so it was just like it was an incredible place to sort of daydream and imagine like what other worlds could look like outside of a like 1-bedroom Section 8 apartment where you're like taking food from a food bank, and you like that's not a world where you have much control. But getting to like step into a new world with a whole cast of characters and like incredible orchestral music, that was really special.
Wow, no, that's probably one of the most beautiful recounts of how games have been impactful at an early age that I've heard on the podcast. So I really appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned earlier about the power of storytelling in games. Are there any hopes that you have for what kind of stories are told in the future that you think are worth just kind of putting out there, because who knows, we might see them one day? Is there anything that you're kind of hoping to see one day, hoping that people are brave enough to tackle?
Yeah, I'm really hoping that there are more games to talk about the like duty that we have as humans to each other, to include each other in our lives and to include each other in the things that we are experiencing, to ultimately push back against the scarcity capitalist mindset of I have to get paid XYZ so that I can provide for myself. And then like down the road, there might be someone who's making like a fraction of what I'm making, but I don't care about it because I have what I need. I think I would love to see games that incorporate concepts of collectivism in the actual mechanics, instead of just a game where like I'm thinking about like Final Fantasy VIII, where like you get in Final Fantasy VIII, you like collect a pension from being a mercenary in this seed organization. And I'm just like, it's so interesting that there is this complex mechanic built around like getting a wage as a soldier. And that's super cool on its own. But like, where is the relationship that I get to have as a player to like my immediate surroundings? Like you in the game, you'll go through a town that might be crumbling from ruin or that might be poor, but like, so I would love to see more games acknowledge the capacity for like care that we can do with each other, if we just like ask the questions and spend the time.
Yeah, no, that's a really a really good point. I think game mechanics there's so much to explore and to experiment with the power of game mechanics and having that attention from especially multiplayer games, putting people together in the same environment, and it almost feels overwhelming at times with how unique some games can be with the kind of lessons that they teach. So I'm excited. What are your thoughts on like games for education, like education first games? Do you see a place for those in the future, or do you believe in kind of entertainment first?
I 100% believe in games that take an active role in their responsibility to use games as a capacity to teach. In that, like, any game that has a mechanic is expressing a value system. And so at the very least, the minimal effort that a designer can do is like acknowledge that value system. And so sometimes that value system might be like, it might be capitalist in mind of like, you need X money to buy X thing, but like that is a value system. And what could it look like to have economy systems where players can share resources? Or so there was another piece of the question that I wanted to answer.
Yeah, different systems, economy systems. Just thinking about economy systems itself is huge.
Yeah, I would also think, like, I would love to see more games be critical of the like compound consequences, the like compound lasting consequences of violence. And I think you can do that in a way that isn't like so over the head, like didactic or like in your face, like this is a game about nonviolence, like, but like the like, and games have done this in the past where like I know in certain missions in Red Dead Redemption where like depending on like your actions or your lack of action, a certain character like may die, they may not be there anymore. And I think having some way for the game to sort of acknowledge that loss of life, that I would be really interested in that. Or like in a game where it is a military shooter, like how could they express the psychological impact that has? And it's, what was this? There's another game. Damn, I can't remember the name of the game, but there was a game, and I don't think it may be Far Cry, the latest Far Cry. There was a game where when you like kill one of, no, The Last of Us 2. Okay, so in The Last of Us 2, when you kill someone and they have other friends that are alive, those friends will call out their dead comrade's name, or they'll be like, "No, Susan," like, and I think like that adds this sort of like a visceral,
realistic, emotional.
Right, because then like you realize like you didn't just shoot a sprite,
an NPC,
you like shot Susan, and so I think like I loved that in Mass Effect there were like non-violent solutions to things, and I loved that in Dishonored there were non-violent solutions to things. And so I think if we collectively as an industry can start being critical of the kinds of games we are building, to start being more proactive about ultimately like what are we teaching each other is acceptable.
Totally. Yeah. I admire your knowledge of games. It sounds like you're playing you're just well versed in the kind of the current trends in the games industry. Are you playing any games at the moment that you'd like to mention?
Thank you. I have the past couple months I've been just really busy with work, and so I make a joke to my game industry friends of like, I get it why like game developers joke about not being able to play games.
Yeah.
But a game that I'm playing right now is on the Nintendo Switch called some Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. I think I might be missing a word in that game title, but Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. And it is this game about like you are playing this like deposed goddess who is being punished for having led this human family into the celestial realm, and you're banished to this demon island where you have to like expunge the demons from the island. but the game is a like side-scrolling like action beat 'em up RPG where you like have weapons and skills you can upgrade. And then it's also a like rice growing simulator. And you like there are whole stages where like your character's crouched over and you're like planting the rice, and like depending on how cleanly you set the rice lines, that affects how it grows.
Wow.
And you can put different ingredients into the manure pile to make fertilizer for the rice paddy, and then you can control the water level so that, and then every day you have to come back and weed it. But awesome. It's so cool because, and I think also from a cultural standpoint, like putting in all those mechanics around rice growing, ultimately, like the impact for me was to make me be more grateful about eating rice, that it made me realize that like plant, moving a controller, like to like tediously plant digital rice, and then to imagine just how backbreaking and challenging that must be. Like it made me have so much respect for rice and like how much production and like the miracle that we can go to a store on any street and just buy a package of rice just like that. It's wild. So I think that's probably my favorite thing about the game, is sort of like bringing me back to like expanding my awareness of where I can be more grateful.
I love that. I love that. And it's such a simple, the developers are probably, really, really passionate, really connected to the rice production, and the fact that they went through the effort to educate the players and to turn it into a fun game mechanic that has impacted you. I find that so incredible, and that makes me think that there's no end to the imagination when it comes to the kind of things that games can impact us. Different. It could be as menial as making a cup of tea, and that can
really
be profound. So yeah, no, that's awesome, and that's where I'd love to end the conversation. We did talk about a lot of heavy topics and some great skills and advice throughout the chat, but I'm glad that I at least had a moment with you to hear more about your past and who you are as a person, and what kind of got you to this stage in your career. So thank you for sharing that, and just taking the time to be on the podcast and share your ideas with me. I do really appreciate that. For anyone listening that is interested in following your journey, and hearing about the products that you're going to put out there to help move us forward as a society and as an industry, where can people find you and follow you?
Yeah, the best place to follow me would be on Twitter or LinkedIn. And you can find me by the user at my first name, Javiera, Jav as in Victor, Iera, followed by my old last name, which is B as in boy, G as in golf, Begazo. So that's Javiera, my first name, and the old last name, Begazo, at Javiera Begazo.
Awesome. Yeah, and the links will be in the description below for that as well. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing your journey and how you grow. Awesome.
Thanks so much. This is incredible work that you're doing in setting up this podcast and asking these questions. It's really profound, and like try to constantly challenge the level of impact that you're having in doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope to have you back on someday, a few years down the line, once we've grown in different directions and see how things have changed, how the industry has changed. I'd love that. But thank you for your time today, and wish you the best rest of your day.
Awesome. All right, you too. Take care, Carl.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.